Elizabeth Browning was born on March 6, 1806 in England. Her mother and father were plantation owners, accumulating much wealth. She grew up on a 500-acre estate called Hope End, living a privileged life along with her 11 siblings. When she was 12, she was diagnosed with a nervous disorder which made her very sickly. Elizabeth was a very bright child, mainly because much of her time was spent in her room from a spinal injury, but it's what originated her interest in writing. By the time she was a teenager, she could read Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and also enjoyed reading Voltaire. From the age of 13 on, Elizabeth became solely interested in education, mainly things pertaining to literature. In 1832, her and her family were forced to sell Hope End and move because of financial losses. After that, they moved 2 more times before the year 1837. During this time, she wrote The Seraphim and Other Poems, which came out in 1838, published under her own name. The same year that it came out, Elizabeth had to move because of her poor health. Her favorite brother went with her, but tragically he died in a drowning accident. After his death, she never fully recovered mentally. The first 5 years after the accident were hardest for her. She became very withdrawn, spending most of her time locked away in her bedroom, seeing only 1 or 2 people besides her immediate family. Her poems in 1844 made her one of the most popular writers in the area. It actually inspired Robert Browning to write her in the first place. That's what began the famous courtship of the two. Throughout the courtship, Robert began falling deeply in love with Elizabeth, but she couldn't believe that he could love someone as sickly as she was. She wrote about it in her poems titled Sonnets from the Portuguese. After a year of writing to each other, Robert visited Elizabeth, and they decided that they wanted to get married. Elizabeth's father was a very controlling man and forbade her from marrying Robert. But in the end, love conquers all, and they got married in Italy without her father's permission. Because of this, her father disowned her, as he did with any of his children that got married without his consent. After a long, happy marriage, sadly in 1861, Elizabeth died in her husband's arms. She was considered among the greatest female poets of her time and is still held in high esteem to this day. A few of Elizabeth's most famous poems are Battle of the Marathon, How Do I Love Thee, If Thou Must Love Thee, Let It Be Not, The Seraphim, The Drama of Exile, The Visions of Poets, and Sonnets from the Portuguese. Her poem Battle of the Marathon was written about her father forbidding her to get married, and The Seraphim was the first poem published under her name. 2 of the poems that inspired Robert to write her originally were Drama of the Exile and The Visions of Poets. Sonnets from the Portuguese, published in 1850, were a series of sonnets that Elizabeth wrote while in courtship with Robert. In 1857, after her father died, she wrote Aurora Leigh about female independence because her father still hadn't forgiven her for marrying Robert without permission. She wrote Poems before Congress in 1860, but it wasn't received well. When it was rejected, she said, "I never wrote to please any of you, not even to please my own husband." Shortly after this, in 1862, after she passed away, her son gathered all the letters between Elizabeth and Robert during their courtship and composed and published The Letters of Robert Browning and Elizabeth Bennet. Years later, the book that Elizabeth's son published was made into a movie, showing that the notorious couple and Elizabeth Browning's literary works are still looked upon highly to this day.